Today's guest is Rabbi Dr. Moshe Sokol. He is the rabbi of a shul, has written multiple svarim, and is a professor of philosophy. As dean of Lander College for Men, he has been giving career advice to Bnei Torah since before I was born. That's why I was so excited to hear his expertise about building a successful career in line with Torah values. We also spoke about his expertise in Aggadeta and the relevance that has for Bnei Torah in the workforce. You can check out Dean Sokol's svarim in the links in the show notes. I would like to give a big thank you to Lander College for Men for sponsoring this week's episode. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Stark Tank. Shalom Aleichem, Dean Sokol. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
You have a very interesting story and career path. So maybe you could take us a little bit through your journey from your early days in yeshiva and through college and to where you are now.
Okay. I can only assert with all veracity that I never expected to be a dean. That wasn't a part of my career trajectory. It was not on my radar screen. I spent 7 years in Yeshiva, Philadelphia, high school and Beis Medrash. I learned in Itri, in Eretz Yisrael. After Philadelphia, I got smicha there. Came back. I learned a couple of years in Torah Vodas, and also started college at Brooklyn College. Majored in philosophy, minored in comparative literature. Did a Ph.D. in philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania, and shortly thereafter began my career at Turo, where I taught and did various administrative tasks, all the while being engaged in Jewish philosophy, which is my original academic specialty. And Dr. Lander, about 25 years ago, asked me to put together Lander College for Men, which I did, and Baruch Hashem, it's blossomed and flourished over the years, and here I am, b'hashgacha pratis.
Wow. And you mentioned that you never dreamed that you were going to end up here. What were your plans when you were a young man? Did you have any sort of vision that you thought might turn out?
So when I was in my 20s, by the time I started college, I projected an academic career for myself. And that's basically what happened, except that there were kind of two detours along the way. I got smicha at Itri. I was not expecting to become a Rav in a shul. That wasn't a part of my planned trajectory. But I was on a mission in Israel, on a Dati Lumi kind of leading a group, and somebody who lived in Brooklyn met with me. They were starting a shul, which originally called Chevra Aliyat Toranit, very Zionist shul. Actually, most of the founders made Aliyah. But in any case, they founded a minyan, and after several Shlichei Aliyah, they decided they would have somebody who was not going to pick up and go back to Israel. So I became a Rav as well. I've been in the same shul since 1990, a pretty long time. So that wasn't where I thought I was going. But again, Hashem works in mysterious ways, and we end up in places that we wouldn't have expected. But hopefully we do a few good things in that context. Same thing with administration. I was planning to be a professor, which I did become, but I ended up spending more time in administration than I ever expected I would. The main point being, I guess from a broader perspective, is that one should not, I think, be too rigid in one's career plans, that one should have definitive goals and pursue those goals aggressively, but at the same time remain open to opportunities that circumstances afford.
Could we dive a little bit deeper into that? You sit with college kids a lot and you try to help them navigate career choices. But as you just alluded to, career choices are something that we're making throughout our lives. And a career choice that a person makes in college is very different than a career choice when he's making a little bit down the line. But those are still important decisions that are going to have a big impact on their life. So can you talk a little bit more about finding that right balance of, on the one hand, being open-minded to shift gears a little bit into detour while you're already out in the workforce, but also not being too flippity-floppity that you're always just without any clear direction or goals and development?
Okay, great question. In general, I always tell our students that the years that they are post-Israel, pre-career, are the most important decisions in a person's life are likely to be made then. the two most important being career choice and choice of a spouse. It doesn't get much more important than that, so it's a very sensitive time. And from my own personal experience, I think it was crucial that I had very defined goals. I happen to be, by nature or nurture or upbringing, a pretty determined guy, so I was very focused on getting where I wanted to go. But that sometimes stands in tension with flexibility. But I think more important, if I had to weigh the two, I would say the most important thing is finding where you want to go and working really hard to get there. And secondarily, trying to remain open to other possibilities. I would say that's a secondary rather than a primary goal. Without that primary focus, you are likely to end up nowhere. So when it comes to career choice, there are a number of different factors that are very, very important. Amongst them, you need to be good at a particular career. So if you major in mathematics, for example, and want to become an actuary, don't do that if you can't add. You need to be good at math. You also need to enjoy it, which is another factor. People can be very good at certain things and not particularly enjoy them. And since the average person will be spending a large bulk of his waking life in a particular career task, it's very important to enjoy what you're doing, which is another important factor. Another important factor is parnasa. In other words, somebody, for example, may love, basket weaving and be very, very good at it, but it may be hard to support 5 tuitions in the 5 towns as a basket weaver. So it's important that one be practical about one's career choices as well. There are some people who would love to be rabbeim, for example, but would find that economically challenging. Not necessarily should they, because there are some contexts where a rebbe can earn quite a reasonable parnasa, but that needs to be taken into account. There are many kind of dewy-eyed young men, I want to go into chinuch and I want to go into rabbanis. Those are wonderful things, but one needs to be very clear about what it takes to be successful. I often tell my students that in the old days, when somebody wanted to become a rebbe, you didn't even really need a college education. In fact, in the old days, nobody had a college education. Many of the Rebbeim were imports from Europe after the Holocaust. Now the expectation is that you have a bachelor's degree and generally a master's degree if you want to work in the modern or centrist Orthodox system. Well, that requires, focus and determination. You need to get a bachelor's degree. Some people will want to seek out one of these quickie bachelor's degrees, which are not necessarily valued in a potential employer's school, which focuses on academic excellence. So there are many different factors, and one needs to balance them all, which is to say that there is no formula. I've given some factors, but what one needs to do is to seek input and advice from people who are in the field. That is crucially important. You may have a certain idea of what it's like to be, say, a family practitioner or a dentist, but until you not only talk to them, but hang out in a doctor's office or a dentist's office or a lawyer's office or whatever, you really need, and even then it's only just a taste, but you need to get a real feel for what it's like. So that's extremely important.
A friend of mine who learned in this yeshiva Karen Biavina once did that for a summer, and the first sight of blood, he dropped to the floor and fainted. So.
Right. I mean, dentistry, I was just talking to somebody, dentistry is a wonderful career, but basically you're going to be spending your waking life looking down people's throats and drilling holes in teeth, by and large, unless you're a specialist, which is fine. And it's a wonderful career. And if you love to learn, it's a great career because you can make your own hours and earn a good parnasa. But you just really have to enjoy the dexterity, and you need to have those skills to look behind in a mirror to see exactly what a tooth looks like from the inside out and be good at drilling and enjoy it. And they're quite different things. So at the end of the day, any person choosing a career needs to think about those factors I mentioned. Number 2, spend time with and speak to people who are in those fields. And number 3, seek the counsel of a wise person. It could be a rebbe. It could be, often is, could be a mentor. Parents can be very, very valuable resources, but you need to separate out mommy and daddy's agenda from your agenda. Maybe, the old saying, every mother or father wants his kid or her kid to be a doctor. I don't think that's true, but a lot of parents do have certain predilections, and obviously they're very important, and parents know kids extremely well. But mom and dad are not going to be the dentist or the doctor or the accountant or the actuary. You're going to be the student. So you really need to separate that out. Take advantage of parental advice because they know you well and they really care about you. And those are invaluable assets. But at the end of the day, I always tell students this, you have to make that choice. Nobody can tell you whom to marry. Parents can't tell you. Your Rebbe can't tell you whom to marry. You have to be the one who makes that decision because it's your life. You should seek input from many people, or people who know you well and who are wise and have life experience. At the end of the day, it's your choice. And you have to be very careful about, in seeking advice, which is of inestimable value, is making sure that you are comfortable with the advice and that it becomes your decision rather than somebody else's decision. I'll just share with you an experience that I had very early in my rabbinic career, which had a really huge impact on me. I happened to have been in Eretz Yisrael at the time, and I had just started as a Rav, and I got this frantic call from a woman in my shul. She was a single woman in her, single obviously as the story unfolds, but she was in her mid-30s, and she had just gotten engaged. It was a huge simcha. Everybody was thrilled, a wonderful person. And the person she got engaged to was a divorcee, and somebody began to feed her stuff from the divorce proceedings which cast a very negative light upon her chassan. So she called me frantically, like, what should I do? So I didn't know, especially since I was, new to the profession, new to being a Rav. So I said, let me think about it. And I called my Rav. Rav David Cohen, some of you may know him, a great posek, and I used to daven in that shul. And I said, Rav David, this is what happened. Like, what do I do? And the first thing he told me, I've never forgotten this. It's been a guiding light in my shul and also in counseling students, which I do a lot of. He told me, first thing I'll tell you is, don't tell her what to do. It's her life, and it's her decision. And you are not going to be the one living with, on the one hand, possibly a bad husband, or on the other hand, possibly living as a single woman, never getting married. That can't be your responsibility. What you need to do is to try to help clarify the circumstances, get as much information as possible so that she can, with your assistance, make a decision that is most reasonable for her. And that's really very, very important. And it applies to career choice as well. You need to get advice from a lot of people, students, as they seek that advice. But at the end of the day, don't choose a career because Mom said, Dad said, Rebbe said, as much as you should respect them tremendously. And they really, really care about you. But it's your choice, and you have to be comfortable with that choice. You have to adopt it and identify with it as your own choice. And you're not doing it because you were told to do it.
You mentioned you focused on three things: your skills in a certain area, your enjoyment from a certain activity or field, and the parnasa, those three pillars. I feel like it can be the most dangerous when the Torah values are similar to the values of the society around us, but different. So parnasa, for example, is a Jewish value, but running after wealth is not. So can you talk a little bit more about the Torah lens of those three things and how to make sure that we're living in line with the Torah value of those three pillars and not the society's yardstick?
Great. That's an excellent point. And there is yet another fourth factor, which I neglected to mention because I didn't particularly prepare for this interview, didn't know it was happening. But and I've spoken about this in the past, and there's another factor, fourth one, which is very, very important, which is your ultimate ideals and your values. That is to say, you can find a career which you enjoy and you could be good at and earns a good parnasa, but is in tension with your core values. And so you may be great at finance, but don't want to immerse yourself in a Wall Street culture which values Rolex watches and vacations every other week in the Bahamas or whatever. I don't mean to be pejorative about anything. I'm just using that as a kind of exaggerated metaphor. At the end of the day, one should never choose a career that is inconsistent with one's core values. What are your core values? How do you develop core values? That's really where your yeshiva education comes in, and where input from Rabbeim and parents can be very, very, very helpful. At the end of the day, before you make any of these choices, you need to figure out what's really important to me in my life. And so, for example, if learning Torah is much more important to me than anything else, then you can choose a profession where the economics are not so great. As if somebody is really called, I use that term, to be a Rebbe, then that's great, and that's wonderful. As long as you understand the practical implications of that and don't go into the field in ignorance, then that's wonderful, and you can be great at it. There are, unfortunately, many, many people who go into chinuch, never really thought through carefully what it takes to be a successful mechanech, not just economically, but in terms of personality and the many, many other factors. So their values drove the decision, but their values erased all the other considerations or masked, better yet, some of the other considerations, so they went in without a full picture. But at the end of the day, what's most important of all, ultimately, is what's important to you in your life. What do you want to accomplish? Or let's say when the time you hit 70 or 80 or 90 or whatever it is, and you look back at your life, you want to say, that was a life well lived. It was meaningful. It's a life that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have wanted me to live. I've used my talents, whatever they are, for the good. Now, it doesn't mean that those talents are going to be used for completing Shas. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll be used being the president of a school or of a shul or leading a community. There are many ways to use the many talents we have. People often forget the famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omed, Torah, Avoda, and Gemilas Chasadim. You need all three, but that doesn't mean that every single person will embody all three equally at the same time. There are some people who are more Gemilas Chasadim people. Doesn't mean they shouldn't learn or they shouldn't daven with kavanah. There are some people who are more daveners. There's some people who are more Torah learners. All three need to be a part of the fullness of life. But when a person looks back on his life, whenever that time comes, it doesn't mean necessarily it's going to be one of those. It could be some combination of those that best captures what a person's strengths are. But at the end of the day, yes, that those values are really important. Now, I didn't answer your question in any precise way, because there is no precise answer outside the context of a particular individual. So a particular person in choosing a career should be having this conversation with a Rebbe who can help that Talmud clarify values. But at the end of the day, if the person is going to devote himself to learning at the expense of some other factors, he really needs to know the costs, and also needs to be confident. Needs to be confident that those are truly his values, not values that he was educated in without fully identifying with, because it happens. A lot of people just kind of go with the stream, and they kind of go with the flow, and they tend to take things upon themselves just because that's the way they're taught. But what works at age 15 or 18 or 20 or 22 may not work at age 45. And so one really has to truly identify with the values that shape that decision-making, and it needs to be done, here I'll quote Socrates, the unexamined life famously is not worth living. One needs to really think about these things independently so that you really believe that that's what you want your life to be like, irrespective of the costs or challenges or whatever, because that is truly what is most meaningful, not just at age 18 or 20, but as you project your life into the future. A good Rebbe would be able to help a person clarify that, assuming that the Rebbe has that broader picture in mind. So whom one goes to for that advice is also of incomparable value.
It's somewhat easy to sit here and discuss values, but if you look outside, there's clearly a big challenge in living a life where people feel that they're aligned with their values and they're not going after their rat race, they're not feeling overly stressed, they're not feeling that they're getting carried away. So from all of your experience, are there any other, besides for the connection with the Rebbe, any other things that you see that can be indicative or help people really practically live a life in today's world that is aligned with the values that we're sitting here talking about?
Great question. So I don't want to. I want to continue to stress the importance of a Rebbe, and that goes without saying. But there is another factor as well, which is, or another, I wouldn't say alternative, but another beacon, maybe would be a better word, which is look to people who've succeeded from your perspective in balancing. Who are your role models in your community, in your shul, people who've gone to Keren B'Yavneh in this case and finished yeshiva and have moved into whatever field they've gone in and seem to you to have a good balance, seem happy, seem content with the life they've chosen, and seem to kind of like have it together, so to speak. And those are people who are role models who can be extremely helpful because remember that a Rebbe who's steeped in Torah and truly has the values of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in mind, and who may have spoken to many, many Talmidim and have a very good feel for it. But there's a difference between getting those experiences vicariously and getting them directly. And somebody who's in the field is best able to convey what it's like to be in that field. And so choosing a role model who's really successful is a wonderful complement to somebody who is a great Talmid Chacham.
Okay, so we spoke about your career advice that you've developed into Bnei Torah and career over many, many years. I want to shift gears for a second. And talk about one of your rabbinic interests, which is the study of Aggadeta. So can you tell us a little bit about the origins of how you became to fall in love with this part of Torah?
Okay, great. So I guess I'd first say that it's not exclusively rabbinic, it's also academic. Since I am a professor of Jewish studies, so I have an academic interest as well as a rabbinic interest. So I have to confess that when I was a yeshiva bacher years ago, like most yeshiva bacher, when I got to a difficult Aggadeta, I kind of like zipped past it to get to the quote meatier or weightier halachic sugyas, which is what the focus of our yeshiva education was, and that's fine, and I have no complaints about it. But over the years, I began to give shiurim in Gemara in my shul and also at the school, and we came across Aggadetas, and I focused on them with the same attempted depth I focused on in everything because that's just what came up, and I discovered that they were more fascinating and remarkable than I had anticipated, and they were extraordinarily deep and provocative and demanded further in-depth study, but in some ways very similar to the way you learn a sugya in any sugya in Shas, which is to say every word is taken with immaculate care. The Gemara was written with immaculate care, and so every phrase, every nuance has to be questioned. Why does it say this? Why doesn't it say that? Are there sugyas which say otherwise elsewhere? To really kind of learn up, as it were, the Gemara, the Aggadeta, as carefully as one would learn anything else. I'm speaking specifically about Aggadic narratives or Sipurei Aggadah, that is, stories that appear in Shas or sometimes Midrashim. There are other kinds of Aggadetas that are more theological or whatever, but I'm focusing specifically on Aggadic narratives, Sipurei Aggadah. And I always had an interest in literature. I minored in comparative literature in college, so that's part of it too. And I found that the derech halimud I got from my rebbeim over many years in yeshiva could be applied to, in some ways, to learning Sipurei Aggadah, but the resources that one needs to bring to bear in order to fully or adequately or attempt to adequately explicate these difficult Aggadetas were not the same resources that you bring to bear in analyzing a standard halachic sugya. So I felt I needed to draw upon insights from psychology or history or philosophy or what have you to provide the kind of background that will be helpful to understanding these Sipurei Aggadah. I firmly believe that they were written with exquisite care. Chazal included them, the Mesadrei Gemara, in the Gemara because they weren't there to entertain us merely. They were there to provide us with deeper lessons about life, about hashkafa, about human beings, about core Torah values, about Darkei Alimud. And so I felt that it was really worth investing time in that limud, and eventually, have been giving shiurim over the years in these subjects, both at my shul, where I'm a Rav, and also at the college. And basically, what I decided to do was to assemble those shiurim, write them up as books, and publish them. So one was published called "The Snake at the Mouth of the Cave," Koren Press, Malgate Press, Koren Publishers. I have another volume coming out very, very shortly called "A Mysterious Guest for Dinner." These titles derive from an Aggadeta that is contained within the volume. And my goal is to kindle in others my passion, love, and profound respect for the authors of these Aggadetas in others, so that other people will be inspired to learn the many Aggadetas that one encounters, Sipurei Aggadah, that one encounters while learning, with the same love, attention, and care as any other sugya in Shas. And I think that anybody who does that will be amply rewarded, both as a human being, as a person, as a Jew, but also as far as just understanding Torah better and the messages of Chazal.
And do you recommend having some sort of organized limud at Aggadeta, whether it's going through your books or the Inyako, or is your goal a little more just to have people that are learning to be more anyway, just to give it its proper due and not skip over it?
That's a great question. So I think the first thing everybody should do is read my book. That said, one of the things about the extraordinary riches of our Torah is that it has many, many, many manifestations, and different people with different abilities, interests, and tastes can find their path into Torah. I would never suggest that anybody should abandon the lechem basar of the standard sugish and shas, and of course halacha, but those who have a special interest in, passion for Aggadeta could make a Seder Halimud out of that as well. It could be in Yaakov, it could be whatever. I think every person who's learning should, when they encounter an Aggadeta, should take it as seriously as anything else. So I guess it really depends. This is a migvan. I guess it really depends upon the person and his interests, but this is, in my estimation, a domain of serious Torah learning that has been relatively neglected over time. There are not that many mafarshim on Aggadeta. If you open the Yaakov, obviously there are some. There are other classic mafarshim, which obviously should most certainly be consulted in learning a piece of Aggadeta. But I found myself that as invaluable as these mafarshim were, and I can't stress enough how invaluable they are, dar v'darshav, like every generation needs to find its own path into the Torah. Somebody who has been inculcated in the brisker Derech HaLimud is not going to find Polish pilpul of the 17th century very satisfying, just because that's not the way we learn today. And so my goal is to kind of, for myself, and if others can benefit, great, bring the study of Aggadeta up into the 21st century efforts on the part of somebody who really struggles to understand them, using whatever resources we currently have available to us, as historically all Mefarshim used whatever resources they had available to them. So we kind of stand on the shoulders of giants who knew all of Shas, the Mefarshim, just amazing. But nevertheless, they were writing in their time, and we have to try to understand things in our own way, using them as backbones.
And to finish off, do you think there's a particular Aggadeta that you think would be very relevant to our topic at hand, the topic of being in Torah who balances the responsibilities of work and Torah at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll answer that in two ways. My goal in learning Aggadeta in general is to take them on their own terms. You say, as you preface the question, as a rabbi, how do you appreciate, or how did you come to this? And I'm not coming to this as a rabbi in the sense that what does the Aggadeta in and of itself seek to teach us? I don't want to exploit it or manipulate it for any sermonic or moral purposes. It's there. It's a piece of Torah. Let's learn it up. So I'm not using it for those purposes. Now, if you'd ask me the following question, given what's out there, are there lessons to be learned? Yes, every one of these Aggadetas has manifold lessons for what it is to be a human being, a Jew, Bnei Torah, learning Torah. There are many, many lessons. Are there any Aggadetas which you might say post facto reflection, or might they be relevant to? Yes, I would say yes, that's true. It just so happens one of the chapters in my book talks about Rabbi Yochanan and Ilfa, who were both Chaverim back in yeshiva days. It's mashma from the Gemara that Ilfa was the superior Talmud Chacham. They were both suffering from excruciating poverty and decided together to leave the Beis Medrash to go earn a parnasa. They left the Beis Medrash. I'm not going to go into the details of the Aggadeta because it would take us too long. I'm just kind of doing a brief summary, but any brief summary violates the richness and nuances of the Aggadeta itself. That said, the summary is, if they left the Beis Medrash, Rabbi Yochanan heard a voice saying that he should not leave the Beis Medrash, he should go back to learn. Ilfa did not hear the voice. Rabbi Yochanan says, I heard the voice, I need to go back. So he returns, Ilfa parts ways, and there is a parting of the ways between two intimate friends in Chavrusas. Rabbi Yochanan eventually becomes the Rosh Yeshiva and becomes a man of considerable means by virtue of achieving that stature. Ilfa goes out into the business world and becomes a very successful businessman. And Ilfa was challenged about that decision. Did he do the right thing? After all, he was the better learner of the two. And Ilfa responded, I challenge you to find any halacha in the Mishnah from which I can't any shaila from which I can't infer, or any issue that I can't infer from the Mishnah itself. And so an older man comes and challenges him, having to do with the halachas of Yerusha. Again, I'm not going to go into the technical details of it for lack of time. But at the end of the day, Ilfa says the following: if I can't meet your challenge, I'm going to climb up the mast of a ship and I will jump off if I fail, which is quite a remarkable scene. You can just begin to imagine vividly Ilfa climbing up the tall mast of a ship and hanging at the top and saying, okay, challenge me. If I get it right, great. If not, I jump, which is, why does he do that? What is it supposed to signify? Again, these are all richly symbolic and meaningful actions. The challenge is, without going into the details of the halacha, basically the challenge is how much Yerusha will go to children and to grandchildren, depending upon the language of the Borish. Basically the idea is that if the person who's about to die says, my grandchildren should get money as well, then the children get a little less to provide for the grandchildren. So this old wise man is the one who challenges Ilfa with that question. Ilfa responds by saying mitzvah l'shmo divrei hames, which is a teaching of the Mishnah, and he doesn't need to jump off the mast, and that ends the story. What Ilfa is arguing, in effect, is that his going out to work did not cost him one whit of Torah knowledge. He was willing to risk his life on the claim that he remains nohev Torah, lomei Torah, even if he went out to earn a parnasa. And the old man's challenge about Yerusha, intergenerational Yerusha, was really, as I understand it, a challenge about the passing of the baton from the great Tanaim to the period of the Amoraim. Rabbi Yochanan and Ilfa were interstitial figures in that transmission. Rabbi Yochanan was really a very, very, very early Amora. Some say he was even a Tana. This is at that transitional phase. The old man was saying, how are you going to leave stuff not to your next generation, to the following generation? You need to make sure there's Torah for the following generation. And Ilfa was convinced that going out to work is not inconsistent with the challenge of making sure that future generations can learn the Torah. So it's a very powerful claim. What the Gemara's attitude towards his claim is complicated, difficult to unravel. After all, who's the hero of the story? Ultimately, it's Rabbi Yochanan. Goes back and becomes the Rosh Yeshiva. On the other hand, how many Rabbi Yochanans are there? And Ilfa does retain mastery of the Torah. So the Gemara itself, remember many of the Mesadrei Gemara were themselves full-time learners. They weren't necessarily engaged in trade, and they valorized, the life of Rabbi Yochanan, who was the author of the Talmud Yerushalmi. But so Ilfa's position is both vigorously advocated, and on the one hand, also not necessarily fully endorsed. And the Gemara has a complex attitude towards Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan, which is fine, because the fact of the matter is that somebody could be Rabbi Yochanan, maybe should have stayed in learning. On the other hand, Ilfa was the greater of the Talmud Chacham of the two. It's better learner than Rabbi Yochanan, and he maintained his learning. So what I love about this Gemara is, number one, it is one level, a vigorous endorsement of the possibility of going out into the working world and nevertheless maintaining one's adherence to, love of, knowledge of Torah on the part of at least somebody as great as Ilfa. And on the other hand, it questions that to some extent as well. And at the end of the day, Rabbi Yochanan is Rabbi Yochanan. So it's a very complex Aggadeta, and that's one of the reasons I love it so much, because it doesn't leave us with easy answers. It raises questions. It raises great possibilities. It would endorse the life of the many of us who've gone out to work, but it still raises questions. And that is a part of the genius of the Aggadeta. It doesn't always come up with easy solutions to life's challenges that don't in themselves have easy solutions. And that's fine, because that's the way life is.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your insights, and thank you for all of your advice, all of the Aggadeta that you shared with us today. And we look forward to reconnecting at some point and doing this again at some point in the future.
Sounds good. Tizkel and Mitzvahs, keep up your wonderful, wonderful work.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Starting. If you're still listening at this point, that means that you've enjoyed. Please take a moment to give us a 5-star review, make sure that you're subscribed, and share this episode with a few friends. I want to thank our production team, Yoni Schwartz, Yitzhak Schmidman, and Yossi Book. Until next week, keep on steiging, Chevra.